All right, let's talk about some news stories. This is pretty amazing. This person is in India, and as you probably heard, I've certainly heard a lot about this, the Apple AirPods have now been approved to use as hearing aids, which is great because they're much cheaper than hearing aids, and they can serve as a replacement for a lot of users. And so this guy bought some for his grandma, but now it doesn't work because it's geolocated. You have to be in the United States for it to turn on for some reason. You can't turn it on in India. So what he did after a few days was he figured out how to build a Faraday cage, a box here, and then they went online and found a list, I think at like wiggle.org is a place where they plot SSI MAC address locations. And first he tried, it does a GET request to get the location, and he tried modifying that with Burp, and that didn't work. And then he realized that it actually uses the Wi-Fi to tell where you are. So somehow he was able to calculate the Wi-Fi SSIDs that are near a location in California, which I think he got it from Wiggle. Wiggle is one where people drive around and record the Wi-Fi traffic, and they geolocate these. So he figured out a whole series of the things you would see from a location in here. And so they built a Faraday cage, and out here they put a jammer to remove the other signals. They ran a leaky microwave, which created interference, and they were able to then they made a device that would simulate a whole series of access points, and now they were able to do it. So after they got it to work once, then they made a more professional Faraday cage, as you can see, a box with wire all around, and now they can run this software that simulates the location in California. And apparently, all you have to do is be in California once, then you can unlock it and turn on this feature, and after that, you can use it in India. So that's pretty amazing, and a nice job of hacking to overcome this problem. So this is another scary privacy intrusion case. There's this thing called LocateX, which the Secret Service uses to locate people, and it's another one of these data broker services where it has got data that it collected from apps, and the Secret Service says because technically somewhere in the terms of service you agreed for this app to collect your data and share it with like business partners, that means we don't need to get a search warrant before the police use it, which seems extremely sketchy and unlikely to hold up in court, I think, because of the Fourth Amendment. But anyway, they're doing it. There are many, many stories like this. Law enforcement are using a lot of technological ways to track people, and arguably not with proper authorization. All right. So Mazdas are vulnerable. The infotainment system in a Mazda is spectacularly vulnerable because you can update the firmware from the USB plug, and all you have to do is make files with the right file name, and it will accept them as legitimate firmware upgrades, so you can upgrade software which will then run. There's many different versions of this, and they say it's interesting, and it probably gives you control over your Mazda, and it might make it possible to do things like turn on advanced features you haven't paid for, and perhaps even affect the operation of the car, but it doesn't represent much of a threat because you have to be inside the car, plugging something in USB port to do it, and if you've already got in the car, you could do a lot of other attacks. Anyway, it's interesting to see the weakness here. There was a guy a few years ago that claimed he was on an airplane, and he plugged a USB port into the port by the airplane, and he was able to hack the infotainment system on the airplane and affect the trajectory of the airplane, make it veer off course. And when he landed, he had a tough conversation with TSA, and that was never verified that he actually did that. But that's a very foolish thing to do and a very foolish thing to admit in a public post. So these traffic captures, we all see them. They open up in 9 pictures, and you have to click every thing with motorcycles or stairs or something. And I hadn't thought of this, but it certainly is obvious. If you've done the machine learning course I've taught, you can totally teach any machine learning to do this, to recognize a bicycle or a stair. And so people have, in fact, found that just simple AIs can beat 100% of these things, which in retrospect should have been pretty obvious. And Anthropic CEO, which is part of Amazon, claims that they're going to have human intelligence right around the corner by 2026 or 2027. They're all claiming this. It's universal among the people that design AIs. They say we're going to have a replacement to a human. However, I think this is complete garbage, and it's not just me, it's also Gartner, which is in the Gartner's in the business of predicting the future, so companies can make strategic decisions, and they say artificial general intelligence is nowhere in sight, and I agree with them. And especially, there are tests. In fact, I may not have that article here, but there was a nice article testing this, where they took I don't have that one, but anyway, they took an AI that can give you turn-by-turn directions to find your way around New York City, and then they tried to test it by blocking off some roads and having shortcuts and see how it handles that, and they were able to deduce that it did not actually understand the map of New York City at all. And I understand this because this is how I navigate. I have no sense of direction and no clue about the structure of cities. I just memorize like landmarks. Go to this store, then turn left, go to this place, and then turn right. I can find my way the way a horse finds their way. But other people have like a sense of direction, and they understand the structure of the city and the map. I've never been able to do that. And the AI is like me. It can memorize a route, it can figure out a way to get there, but it just regards it as like a series of instructions without understanding what they mean. It doesn't actually understand what it's doing. Many tests have shown this. The things we call AIs now are very stupid. They do not understand what they're doing. They are miles and miles away from human intelligence. They can do one specific task with some reliability in a way that fools humans into thinking they're smart, but they aren't a replacement for humans at all. And here's another one. AIs can solve simple math problems, but that's because they've just trained them on like high school textbooks. So they've seen those math problems or things very close to them before, and they're just echoing what they saw. So these people made a secret math benchmark, and it stumps AI models. More difficult math problems, it can't solve them at all. Which, another test that is you're not really making an intelligence that's in any way close to a human intelligence. Hello, Rouhani. So this is pretty cool. There's a new ransomware out there, and what it does is it uses BitLocker to encrypt your hard drive, which is the built-in Microsoft encryption routine, and it does it with a random password, so now all your data is gone. So that's the usual problem with BitLocker, but the way it made the random password can be reverse engineered. They're pretty amateurish programmers, relatively low-skilled, and so what they did was they created the encryption key from things like the network traffic and memory usage data, so there are no patterns, but they made a decryptor. A company made a free decryptor, so if you run it shortly after you get infected, it's able to reproduce the process that was used to create the random key and apparently get it, because they say you can decrypt your code. So you decrypt your encrypted stuff. So that's nice. It sounds good, but the problem with this is almost everybody does almost everyone does double ransomware these days, where they not only encrypt your files, they steal them, and then they require a ransom to not post them publicly or sell them. So this wouldn't save you from that second attack. Oh, there was a Google event today? I did not know anything about that. Yeah. Anyway, a lot of events this time of year. And so, as you probably know, X is in terrible trouble ever since Musk bought it, because he turned it into a right-wing cesspool of Nazis and crazy propaganda. Most companies cannot advertise there anymore because they don't want to appear next to really offensive racist posts, which is what it's full of. But now that Trump has won, they're all trying to plot a way to go back there in order to cart favor with Trump. The Washington Post was first, even before the election, avowing the need of Trump, flattering Trump. This is where you deal with despots. You have to flatter them and buddy up to them and tell them they're great, and especially find a way to give them money, and then they'll love you. And so people figure they really better get back on X to butter up Musk and Trump so they don't take revenge on them, which is probably entirely correct. And the Silk Road. Ross Ulbricht is the guy that ran this. It was the marketplace where you could get murder for hire, drugs, guns, and everything else that's forbidden online using Bitcoin. And they caught him about a mile from here, and they locked him up, and they gave him a double life sentence because of the huge amount of illegal drugs that were moved there. He also paid for 6 murders, which didn't actually take place, but he didn't know that. People defrauded him. But he thought he had committed 6 murders and bragged about it, of people that irritated him. And so Now, Trump has promised many times on the campaign trail that he is going to pardon Ross Ulbricht and let him out of prison. And I just heard a podcast this morning where the person that arrested him said, this is a really bad idea, this is a really bad guy, he did really bad things, and you shouldn't pardon him. We'll see what happens. But he's a hero to the libertarians, of course, because libertarians think the drugs should be legal anyway. However, I don't even think libertarians think murder should be legal. And I remember I talked to the head of the FBI task force for cyber crimes, and I asked him, why did this guy get such a stiff sentence? He said, because of the drugs. And I said, oh, well, coming from San Francisco, I forgot that drugs were illegal. I thought it would be the murders. But they didn't really care about the murders, they cared about the drugs. The drugs have a much bigger sentence. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Another thing to wait for, Trump has promised it, so maybe he'll do it. This guy may be out. He's been in there for more than 10 years now, so in the grand scheme of things, he certainly has been punished, I suppose. But anyway, we'll see. So I've been reading about bird flu for months. H5 bird flu is scary, not because it spreads among humans, but because it has a very high fatality rate. It's been wiping out bird flocks everywhere. And it had been various isolated cases in America of people that work closely with farm animals. It spreads from birds to something else like, I think, pigs or horses, and people who work closely with them can get infected on the farm, but nobody's died yet. There's been like a total of 8 or 10 human cases. And it doesn't ever seem to mutate to spread from human to human. But now somebody in Canada is in critical condition and they were not in contact with animals. So people have been watching this very carefully and even stockpiling vaccines and stuff for it, because they say even though it hasn't yet started spreading from human to human, if it does, it'll be really, really bad because the mortality rate is like 50%. I remember the mortality rate of COVID was 1%, and that was enough to send the world into a panic and hide us all in our home for more than a year to avoid it. 50% is unthinkable. That's like the bubonic plague. That's really scary. So everyone's watching very carefully to see if this starts spreading from humans to humans. Anyway, yeah. All right. So let me stop the